Now that the main portion of NFL free agency has been completed, what is at the top of Howie Roseman's to-do list heading into the 2025 NFL Draft? We'll get into that and more on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code in all capital letters Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. So the Eagles didn't have the most active, aggressive free agency period, although I like some of their latest moves, bringing in Azeez Ojulari on the edge, Joshua Uche as well, bringing in some Kelee Ringo competition in the form of Adoree Jackson. They did trade away Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for Kenyon Green and a swap of late-round draft picks this year and next year. So it wasn't like the Eagles didn't do anything, but most of what happened in free agency was Howie Roseman being disciplined, letting a lot of guys go, cash in with other teams. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. You look at Mekhi Becton. Of course, trading away CGJ, Darius Slay, signs with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was more of a maintenance offseason. It was bringing in some low-risk, high-reward players, re-signing your own, Saquon Barkley, Zach Bond, getting those extensions done, Lane Johnson as well. I'd imagine at some point this offseason we'll get an extension from Cam Jurgens and the Eagles. So overall, again, not the busiest offseason, comparatively speaking. Howie Roseman normally is very aggressive around this time of year, but still at the same time, we have some new pieces for the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles. But these pieces that Howie brought in, as I mentioned on the show last week, they're coming in to potentially fill a hole. Like, they are options at positions where there were question marks. Like Adoree Jackson could be the outside corner this year. Joshua Uche, Azeez Ojulari could both be a key part of that edge rotation. Kenyon Green could be your starting right guard next year. But none of the moves that Howie Roseman made this offseason cemented these players' spots in the starting lineup this year. Honestly, they brought in a bunch of plan Bs. I don't think they want any of these guys to emerge as the guy this year, unless they really have great seasons like Zach Bond or Mekhi Becton last year. I think they see it as a worst-case scenario that, for instance, Adoree Jackson starts at cornerback this year. I think they hope that Uche and Ojulari can meet their former ceilings as second-round picks that both have had some really good sack production at the NFL level. But I don't think they're banking on those moves. They're creating potential solutions while also not completely blocking off opportunities from younger players that are already on your roster or rookies that you're going to bring in this month. So there's still a lot to be done in this draft, and I think there's a lot of upgrades. I kept saying the big moves of this offseason are going to come through the draft in April, not through free agency in March. So what are those moves that Howie Roseman needs to make? What are the top things on his priority list, his to-do list, for the 2025 draft after the main activity of free agency has come to a close? And again, Howie's always making moves in free agency. Mekhi Becton was signed right after the draft last year, and he was an elite starting right guard for your Super Bowl championship team. But again, the main moves have happened, so now that those waves are past, what's the priority heading into the draft? Here are three top things to do for Howie Roseman this year in the draft. Number one, I would say, is add another pass rushing defensive tackle to this rotation with Jalen Carter, with Moro Ijoma. You have Jordan Davis, you have Thomas Booker, you have four young key pieces of this puzzle. But to me, I don't think Moro Ijoma on his own is going to replace the production of Milton Williams. You hope Jordan Davis can continue to take steps as a pass rusher. He did have a sack in the NFC Championship. He did have a sack in Super Bowl 59. Like, that is a very encouraging sign. I think Clint Hurt did a really good job with JD down the stretch, but you don't want to bank on that. I think Moro Ijoma will break out this year and be a really good pass rushing defensive tackle, But I do think it'll be a strength in numbers kind of thing next to Jalen Carter. It's going to be a pretty equal 3-man rotation between Ajoma, Davis, and a rookie. And I think you do want to add somebody early in this draft to that rotation. Not just because I think you need it with Milton Williams gone, but also like the likelihood of the best player available with your first, maybe even your second round pick, the likelihood of that being a defensive tackle, I think is actually very high. So the number one thing on Howie's to-do list heading into the draft, I think, is add another pass rushing defensive tackle to this rotation. I want that style of player. As good of a prospect as I think Kenneth Grant is, that feels kind of redundant. You already have this big run stopper that's athletic in Jordan Davis. I think you want to add another pass rusher to take advantage of those one-on-ones, those mismatches next to Jalen Carter, because Moro Ajoma, I don't think he's going to have the same snap count as Milton Williams did last year. I think it's going to be more than he had last year, but it's going to be an increase, but still, I would say an even split with, let's say they get Walter Nolan in the first round out of Ole Miss, or a Derek Harmon from Oregon. I personally really like Darius Alexander from Toledo. If they trade down from that 32nd overall pick and have an early second rounder, I think Alexander would be a really interesting option. There are a lot of good names in this class that you can bring in that are this style of player. Even from Tennessee, a day 2 selection, most likely, Omar Norman Lott. That's another player that I really like there. It's a loaded class. You might argue this draft, the best and deepest position is defensive tackle. So number one on the to-do list, bring in another defensive tackle that can get to the quarterback for this rotation next to Jalen Carter. Number 2 on Howie's priorities for the draft, I think you got to add another safety early on. One of these first 3 picks, I think, has to be a safety, and I like Sidney Brown. I'm a big fan of his. When he was coming out of Illinois 2 years ago, I thought his traits were very intriguing. His speed, his range, his ability to get sideline to sideline. The dude can fly. He's a very physical player. When he is getting his hands on a player, he's an aggressive, big-time hitter. But at the same time, I know Vic Fangio didn't trust him last year. He has been a guy that misses tackles because he does play so reckless and out of control. I don't know if he's the best coverage safety. 2 years ago when they used him in the slot at times with all those injuries, and again, he was a rookie. It's not fair to say he was out of position, but I don't think he's the coverage safety of other players. He's not going to be your Brian Branch, if you will, from the Detroit Lions. So I like Sidney Brown. I want them to give him a chance to win the starting job. That was an early 3rd round pick. But I do think you got to bring in competition. And even if you like Sidney Brown and want him on the field this year, I want to see this team use more 3 safety looks in 2025. And especially early on with Nakobe Dean being out, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is going to get a chance to play some meaningful snaps. But Trotter shouldn't be getting the same snap percentage as Dean was last year for the first half of the year. I would like to see them use more defensive backs to help replace Dean, adding that 3rd safety to either compete for the starting job of Sidney Brown or even be a part of a rotation to be that 3rd guy. I really like that idea. I don't know if Malachi Starks is going to fall to you at 32. Maybe he'll fall to trade-up range. Maybe he falls into the 20s and you can go up and get him. I think more realistically, you're looking at Winston Jr. from Penn State. You're looking at Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. Maybe Nick Emenwari. If you think if you think it's too much of a stretch to say 2 safeties will go inside the top 20, although they could because of how well Emenwari tested. But if you can't see that, he'll probably be an option, even if it's in the form of a small trade-up. I think they do need to bring in a safety with one of those first 3 picks. I want that playmaker that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was. I don't want to settle at safety again like you did in 2023. Can you get by in this Fangio defense with all these amazing corners and defensive players without that kind of safety? When you have Reed Blankenship, and I think Sidney Brown will be solid, sure. But again, I don't want to settle. I think CGJ was such a difference maker in this defense, and I want to try to add that caliber of player again. Again, that's 6 interceptions at this position that are walking out the door and heading to Houston. So that's number 2, add a safety early. And then number 3, this one has an asterisk on it because we'll see what happens regarding the future of Dallas Goedert. But adding a Dallas Goedert replacement, I think, is very important, and it's a really, really good tight end class. Like day 2, Elijah Arroyo, Harold Fannin, Mason Taylor. If one of those guys are on the board with that second pick, even if Dallas Goedert is back for one more year, it would be hard to pass those guys up. And there's some other guys that later on in the draft that I like as well at this position. I think you do want to draft a tight end in the first, I'd say, 4 rounds. It's a good class. That's the thing. It's not only that these are positions of need for the Eagles, both in the short term and long term, but it's a good safety class. It's a good linebacker class, or I should say tight end. It's a great defensive tackle class. So it makes sense from a BPA perspective and from a need perspective. So those are my top 3 things on Howie's to-do list. Get a pass rushing defensive tackle, get another safety early in this draft, and I think draft Dallas Goedert's long-term replacement. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this first segment of this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, yesterday we discussed Howie Roseman's new idea of the offseason, which has been tapping into the market of former first and second round picks that haven't really met their potential in the NFL, so their market's not great. Howie's going for that low-risk, high-reward signing, a 1-year deal, very little to no guaranteed money, and you hope that those guys reach their ceiling in Philly. Like, that's his new idea in 2025 to kind of do things differently than the rest of the NFL. And that got me thinking about like all of Howie's creative ideas since he became GM again in 2016. I ranked my 5 best strategies that Howie Roseman has had since 2016, and I'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we are brought to you by Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, multiple qualified candidates will be there to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork, UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is also brought to you by Gametime. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Gametime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Gametime Picks, it curates better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, and theater, and more. I just checked the Gametime app, actually. There are some amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up for college basketball, the NHL, MLB, the NBA playoffs are coming up soon. The lowest price guarantee as well is another great tool from Gametime. If you find a better price on another platform, which you won't, but if you do, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your purchase. That's LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so Howie Roseman is one of the most creative general managers, I think, in the history of the NFL. He's one of the most self-aware GMs, I think, in the history of sports. Somebody that's so good at learning from his mistakes, from going against the grain, trying different things to build a championship contender, not just for 1 year, but for the short term and the long term. And we talked about it yesterday, like his new idea. Last week, we were trying to figure out what his new idea was going to be. Well, we kind of figured it out. It's in a year where he's saving a lot of money and letting some free agents walk. I think B-plus kind of players getting paid like A-plus players. He let those guys walk. He's trying to replace them with guys that still have potential. Like, he doesn't have the money to spend like he normally does, but he still wants the upside of some of these free agents, like an Azeez Ojulari, a former second-round pick that does have a past when it comes to production at the NFL level, like an 8-sack season, a 6-sack season. He's got the physical tools. Same with Joshua Uche, who had an 11-sack season in 2022 with New England. He's attacking a market where these former top picks that have those physical gifts haven't really fully realized their NFL potential, and therefore they're coming at a much cheaper rate, not a lot of guaranteed money. These guys are trying to bank on themselves and sign one-year prove-it deals, and I think it's a really good idea considering the Eagles' current financial situation on offense. Again, the highest payroll in the league on offense, and you're going to have to pay guys like Jalen Carter soon, and look at that cornerback market blowing up. You're going to have to pay eventually down the road Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, a lot of cash to shell out soon on defense too. So that's his new idea this year. And I was just thinking back to like all of Howie's different creative ideas, and I decided to rank his top 5 approaches from past off seasons. And here's what I came up with. My number one favorite idea that Howie Roseman has been hyper-fixated on was the post-Carson Wentz collect them picks era. So I labeled it collect them picks because if you remember at this time when Carson Wentz was traded after the 2020 season, this was right smack dab in the middle of Les Snead and the Los Angeles Rams quote-unquote F them picks era, where they were just trading first-round picks, second-round picks, top 3-round picks all the time for Von Miller and, Jalen Ramsey and Odell Beckham. Like, they were just spending stupid. I mean, they were trading for running backs and linebackers and defensive ends and safeties. It didn't matter. They didn't have a first-round pick for years. At that time, everybody was being aggressive in trading draft picks. Well, after Carson Wentz was traded, Howie went the opposite way, and he started to collect draft picks. He was trying to take advantage of how aggressive the league was being, and he collected picks so he could also be aggressive, but at the same time, he could build for the long term. He could have his cake and eat it too. He built up tremendous flexibility by collecting so many picks. And it's kind of the theory of, can I turn this penny into a house? Like, what can I trade this penny for? And then you just keep trading over and over. And eventually you started with a penny and you end up getting something a lot bigger. That's what he did with Carson Wentz. He turned what seemed like a disaster, of just your franchise quarterback having one of the worst years of his career, one of the worst regressions in NFL history. After just paying this guy a $100 million contract, he turned what seemed like a nightmare scenario into the golden era of Eagles football. It's like when Dwight in The Office started with, again, that's the whole premise. Like, he ends up starting with, a paperclip and he turns it into a telescope, right? I mean, that's what Howie did with Carson Wentz. He got that first-round pick and that third-round pick from the Colts for Carson. And then he even moved down with the Miami Dolphins in 2021 because they wanted to trade up for Jalen Waddle. He gets a first-round pick in 2022. So he has 3 first-rounders in 22. They used that third-rounder they got from Wentz to move up for Devontae Smith. They traded the Colts' first-round pick and their own first to New Orleans in 2022 for the Saints' first-rounder that year, a 2022 third-rounder, a 2023 first, and a 2024 second. They then used the first and third from the Saints to get A.J. Brown. They swapped that 2023 first from the Saints with Chicago to get Jalen Carter. They used the 2024 second rounder to move up for Cooper DeJean. So Howie Roseman saw the whole league trading picks, and he went the other way. He started collecting picks so then he could be even more aggressive than the rest of the NFL. Like, he got conservative just for a little bit so he could have more. So he had more ammunition to attack, but he also had a ton of draft picks to build a more sustainable core. He could have his cake and eat it too after 2020, and I thought that was just a genius move, and that's the biggest thing that sparked this current era. Like, again, he turned, and I'm sure your head was spinning as I laid out all those different moves he made with draft picks to go get this core, but he turned Carson Wentz, just a shell of Carson Wentz, into Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Jalen Carter, and Cooper DeJean. 4 huge pieces of your Super Bowl championship team. So the collect them picks era of Howie Roseman, that set you up for where you are now as an organization. The second favorite idea I've ever had of Howie Roseman's, starting the trade era. 2017, 2016 and 2017, the jumping up the draft board multiple times, like finding a way to move Kiko Alonso's contract and Byron Maxwell's to the Miami Dolphins, and they let you move up from the 12th overall pick to the 8th overall pick, then moving up from 8 to number 2 overall to get Carson Wentz. Like, that was just unheard of. Like, you had never seen a team, I mean, you've seen teams be aggressive in trading up in the draft for quarterbacks, but to move up 2 spots, to be creative in that way, I mean, that changed everything. Like, that really started this new era where you won your first Super Bowl. It's the thing that started it all, because if you don't trade up for Carson Wentz, then, like I said, you don't get Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Jalen Carter. You don't get home field advantage that year. You don't win a championship. Like, that decision to start being aggressive and trade, I think, really kickstarted the new era of Howie Roseman, right? And you didn't really see, it wasn't just that, but he traded that year for Timmy Jernigan and Ronald Darby and Jay Ajayi. And then he trades for Golden Tate at the deadline the following year. When you think about it, teams before 2016, there were trades, especially in the draft, but you didn't see a lot of teams sending picks during the season, after the draft, during the free agency period. You didn't see a lot of teams spending picks or doing player for player trades until Howie Roseman came along. Like, I really do think he started the trade era of the NFL. It was the first time I think Howie really tapped into an unused market of the NFL to acquire talent. And I think that was a huge part in them winning a Super Bowl. And again, that started the trade era in the NFL, and everybody started doing that and getting aggressive like the Rams. And that's when Howie, after Carson Wentz, started taking advantage of that aggressive era he started and started collecting picks so he could have that ammunition to be aggressive himself, but at the same time to also build sustainably through the draft. So to me, that's number 2, because I think that started everything. Like, this whole idea of Howie Roseman being creative and coming up with new ideas to build a winner, that all started with the 2016 trade era that he started. So I think that's number 2. And then number 3 for me is 2024, the offseason, going against the grain, doing things that Howie Roseman never does. Signing a running back, tapping into that market overcorrection at the running back position, getting Saquon Barkley for $13 million. You could argue that's the greatest steal in the history of the NFL. You paid $13 million for the greatest rushing season of all time, and it led to a Super Bowl. Going for that market overcorrection with Saquon won them a second Super Bowl. And like I said, I think you can make the argument it's the biggest steal in the history of the NFL for what you got out of Saquon in just 1 year. For $13 million, you got, again, the best rushing season ever, and you won a title because of it. And it's not just that, but he went against the grain in the draft too. He never drafted a cornerback in the first round. He'd only drafted one corner ever in the second round. Well, in the past draft, he does both. He takes Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, Cooper DeJean in the second, and they were Rookie of the Year finalists. And without those two guys, are you the number 1 defense in football this year? I don't think so. So for me, the number 3 Howie Roseman idea that I think is up there as one of the best is his 2024 offseason going against the grain, doing things completely different than he's used to, paying running backs, drafting defensive backs. It was a main reason that you beat the Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. Number 4 on my favorite Howie Roseman ideas was the quarterback factory. Or maybe not my favorite ideas, but the best ones he's had that have led to 2 Super Bowls. The QB factory of 2020, drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round. Look, as much as I hated the logic at the time, and still considering the circumstances of that situation, I still don't agree with the logic then. Obviously, now knowing what I know, I'm glad it all happened. But at the time, I did not like the logic. But you have to put it in this list because it got you the greatest quarterback in Eagles history. And when you think about it, the plan at the time was to have an elite backup behind Carson Wentz because you had needed a backup in 3 straight playoff runs. And they saw Jalen Hurts as an elite backup quarterback that could potentially even start at the NFL level. That evaluation of Jalen Hurts was absolutely correct and more. Again, he became a Super Bowl MVP. He made the playoffs every year he has been the Eagles starter. And when you look at it, nobody else really thought that Jalen Hurts was an early second-round selection. I remember Daniel Jeremiah saying most teams had a third or fourth round grade on Jalen Hurts. Now, maybe Pittsburgh would have took him in the second round, but Philadelphia was one of maybe a few teams that saw him in that high of regard. And so their evaluation of Jalen was right. Even if they didn't think he'd be a starter, you do have, and even if you don't agree with the logic at the time, you do have to give them a lot of credit for getting Jalen in the building and having the opportunity to have this future that we are currently living in. So as much as I didn't agree with it at the time, you got to put it in this list. Number 4, the quarterback factory, because it led you to get Jalen Hurts. And then my number 5, Howie Roseman, best idea was creating the Philadelphia Bulldogs defense. Saying, I'm going to take one of the greatest college defenses of all time that is made up of a bunch of cyborg athletes at a ton of positions, and I'm just going to take that defense and bring it over to the NFL on my defense. And then I'll have it for chemistry. I'll have all these close players that know how to win, know how to handle success and pressure. I'll bring in all these different athletes with high potential, high upside, and I'm going to make that my defense. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, bringing in now Azeez Ojulari and Louis Cine. It helped Georgia win back-to-back national championships, and it helped the Eagles win a Super Bowl. So I think those are my top 5 Howie Roseman ideas since 2016. The post-Wentz era, collecting them picks, starting the trade era in 2016, going against the grain in 2024, the quarterback factory of 2020, and then recreating the Georgia Bulldogs defense in Philadelphia. All right, guys, we'll wrap up this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next with a new segment, Prospect versus Prospect. I'm going to utilize the random wheel of names. Coming up next, I'm going to randomize 2 prospects that could be in range for the Eagles at 32 overall, and I'll discuss between these 2 players who I'd rather have with that draft pick. We'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, and I'm starting up a new segment as we really start to, after the main wave of free agency has come to an end, we're really starting to dive into our draft coverage and just thinking of different ways to talk about a lot of prospects each and every week. And we've got 5 shows to do it, but try to do it in a different way. Of course, we have Mock Draft Monday, but I have a new segment I want to start up today, and it's called Prospect versus Prospect. So I'm going to use the random wheel of names. I came up with 10 different realistic names for the Eagles to consider with the 32nd overall pick. Let's say they don't trade up, they don't trade down. We'll do those scenarios in the coming weeks. We're going to do this twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But for now, let's say the Eagles just sit tight at 32 overall. I have 10 prospect names that could be in range with that pick, that could be within the Eagles' considerations based on their position, the areas of need, who could be the best player available at that time. And I'm going to spin the wheel twice, and it's going to be prospect versus prospect. I'll debate which one of those players that I would rather have them take with that 32nd overall pick. Okay, so here we go. I have the random wheel of prospect names pulled up. Let's start with our first spin and see who will debate for the Eagles with the 32nd overall pick. And it looks like the first prospect is going to be Oregon defensive tackle Derek Harmon, who I totally think will be in range with that 32nd overall selection. As I mentioned on Howie Roseman's top to-do list for the draft, getting a pass rushing defensive tackle, to me, is number 1. So I think Harmon would be a good option with that last pick in the first round if they don't trade up or trade down. Right? Let's spin again. Spin the wheel. Oh, I'm sorry. That was Colston Loveland. Derek Harmon versus Michigan tight end Colston Loveland. That's a tough one. For me, It's two of my top three things the Eagles need to do in this draft is get a pass rushing defensive tackle and then get a potential long-term, maybe not long-term, maybe short-term. And if they trade Goddard away this year, they're going to need a guy right away for 2025. Colston Loveland's a good player. I think he's the second best tight end in this class, behind Tyler Warren from the Penn State and Indy Lions. For me, though, I would take Derek Harmon. I like Loveland, the prospect, more than I like Harmon, but I think Harmon plays a more important position. I do like his pass rushing upside. I think he has a high floor. He's a really good run stopper. Again, is he the most athletic player in the world? No. Is he the most bendy, high upside, like high ceiling athlete? I don't think so. But at the same time, like I think he's a high floor player. He's productive getting to the quarterback. He is a good run stopper that you can rotate. Like him and Moro Ojoma combined, I think and Jordan Davis will be able to replace Milton Williams. So I think Colston Loveland's the better player, but I like Derek Harmon better. I think it's a more important position for the Eagles this year. And I think there are some good tight end options on day two. Like I think it's a deep class, just like it is for defensive tackle, but there are some good names for tight ends on day two, like a Mason Taylor or a Harold Fannin or an Elijah Ororio that I don't think are that massive of a drop-off compared to Colston Loveland. Loveland's good, though. I think he's going to end up going probably inside the top 25. If he falls and it's him versus Derek Harmon, I would be okay with either pick, but I think I like Harmon right now more than I do Loveland. And Harmon's a high IQ football player. Like it's just a really good starter, a really reliable player that you can add to a defense that has a lot of young players right now, and there's a ceiling. But I think it's been the lower floor this defense has had in a while, just because it's young and it's a lot of its projections. So adding a guy like this, that I think is a safe prospect, I wouldn't hate that idea. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this Thursday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Until tomorrow, we're going to sign off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.